Hey everyone, today we're gonna play with phyllo dough and we're gonna make a sophisticated yet pretty simple shrimp appetizer. Herb and phyllo wrapped shrimp is one of my oldest recipes. I created it about 2008, 2009. And honestly, I haven't really made it in a while. But I did notice that people are starting to find this recipe through Google search for some reason. And I figured that it probably deserves a new photo because camera technology since 2008 and 2009 has come a long way. So it deserves a much prettier photo. So I figured if I'm gonna make them to take photos, I might as well make a video of it as well. Also, phyllo can be pretty temperamental stuff, so I figured I would share with you my tips on using phyllo that I've learned over the years. It's really delicious, and you can't really beat the crispy, crunchy texture that you get when you wrap something in phyllo or use phyllo in a recipe. So it's totally worth figuring out how to use it. So let's get started. This recipe only needs just a few ingredients, which I have here. I have about 4 ounces of feta cheese that I've crumbled pretty finely. I have about a bunch of flat leaf parsley and a bunch of chives and 2 lemons, well, the zest of 2 lemons, which I've mixed together well, and those are chopped pretty fine. And then I have a pound of 2630 shrimp. 2630 means that there are about 26 to 30 shrimp in a pound. And so that is what I have here. Now these shrimp are not cooked shrimp, they're uncooked. They were frozen uncooked shrimp, which I peeled. And then I cut them in half most of the way, leaving the foot part whole. So what you end up having is sort of this butterfly effect. And that will help us when we're trying to roll up the shrimp. It'll allow the shrimp to lay flatter. And I'm going to just salt and pepper these shrimp. And then I'm just going to kind of toss this around a little bit to coat them. And then we'll get to our phyllo dough. All right, so we have this frozen phyllo dough, and I had it in the refrigerator overnight to defrost. And this has 2 tubes of phyllo dough, and we're only going to use 1 of those tubes for this. So I'm just going to stick this other one back in here. And actually, let me move these aside for just a second. Now what we're going to do is open this, and it comes in sort of a second plastic. So there's this main plastic bag, and then there's the second plastic, and we are going to just cut this into thirds. Just like that. And we're going to work with this 1/3 at a time. The thing with phyllo dough is that you want to make sure that it does not get dried out. So to make sure that that doesn't happen, we're going to put the other halves or the other thirds in the bag, back in the bag, and then we're going to put that in the refrigerator while we work with this one. Now this is back in the bag. We're just going to put this in, and we're going to make sure it's all closed up again so it doesn't get dried out in there in the fridge. And I'm just going to go put that back in the fridge, and we'll work with this third. All right, so we have our 1/3 of phyllo dough, which I've unrolled here, and you can tell it's really paper thin. This dries out super fast, and you don't want it to dry out. So we're going to create a little holding area for the phyllo we're not using. And to do that, we're going to just take some saran wrap. And this damp towel that's just like barely damp, it's not soaking, and we're just going to put that over the saran wrap. The saran wrap will help make it so that the wetness doesn't sort of make our phyllo dough go mushy, and the towel will kind of keep it sort of moist under there. So what we're going to do is take a sheet of this. Now this broke, it's gonna be fine, because what we're going to do is take some melted butter and then just brush each sheet with this melted butter. And like I said, it can be really tricky stuff, this phyllo, but since we're layering it, a couple of breaks here and there aren't gonna matter so much. We're just gonna get some nice butter on there, and then we're gonna take another sheet of phyllo dough, and lay that right on top of our first layer. Now we're going to add some herbs and feta. So we're gonna cover this up while we're doing that so we don't get out of our way. All right, so now, oh, we need our butter again. We're going to butter this second layer. Now every time you're working with phyllo dough, you're gonna butter every layer. So it's gonna be phyllo, and then butter, and then phyllo, and then butter. And after the second layer, we're going to add our herbs and cheese. And so we're just gonna do a nice layer of herbs over the second layer. And then a layer of feta. And I'm just crumbling it a little bit more as I'm putting it down on the paper. We're gonna do another layer, and we're gonna do it 4 total layers of phyllo. So it's gonna be phyllo butter, herb cheese, phyllo butter, phyllo butter. Let's go back to our little area here. That's the moisture zone. And once I get this on, I'm gonna press down a bit so that this is flat as possible. That feta smushes down a little bit. Those herbs all smush in. Gonna cover up. See, this is a little bit tedious, but not hard. And again, if you break a little bit, it's not the end of the world. It's all gonna be fine because there's all those layers holding it together. All right, go back into our phyllo zone. Put another layer of phyllo. Close up shop here. And another layer of butter. Of course, this is delicious. Look at all this butter. All right, now this is where we're gonna cut this in half. We're gonna get 2 shrimp rolls out of each strip here. And we're gonna take one of our shrimp and lay it as flat as possible, letting that little tail stick out just a little bit so people know what's going on here. And we're gonna roll. And it might break a little bit, and like I said, it's okay. No big deal. This is still going to brown up beautifully and be delicious. And there you have it. We have a little shrimp roll in all this phyllo. And we're gonna do another one here. Same way, we're gonna lay this as flat as possible, sticking that tail out just a little bit, and roll. And there you go. So I'm going to do about 26 to 30 of these, and then we'll get them in the oven. Okay, I'm on my last 2, and I've learned a lot through this process. Like I said, I haven't made these in a long time. I haven't worked with phyllo in a long time, so after about 40 minutes of rolling these. So it did take a little bit of time, but I think they're worth it because they're so beautiful. But first of all, the first thing to note is this first layer of phyllo is the most fragile. And so just be very careful on this layer as you're spreading the butter on it. You want to get good coverage of butter because that's what helps make the dough crispy when it cooks, but also a little easier to roll and work with. It kind of moistens it. So what I was noticing is if I just kind of hold the edge and do a light like dab, this works better. Once you get the second layer stabilizes the entire thing and it's not quite so fragile, but I was definitely doing most of my ripping and tearing on this first layer. So that's one thing. The second thing I noticed is that doing 2 at a time is definitely faster than just 1 at a time. So I started just doubling up my process here. So those are some learnings. And then the other thing I was thinking about this butter, and you could do the microwave, but what I like about having it in this little pot right on my stove over here is once this butter sort of starts to get seizing up, you know, it starts cooling off, it's just easy to stick it over on a little flame and get it melted again. So while you could kind of use the microwave to melt your butter, I think this in the saucepan on the stove is a little easier. So I would recommend that. Finally, not finally, I've got a few more learnings, but another learning that I noticed is that I bought this very moist feta. It is so delicious and tasty, but it's a little bit more difficult to kind of get as small as I'd want it, and it sticks a lot to my fingers, which isn't the end of the world, and it tastes good, so maybe that is a good trade-off. But if you want to make your life a little easier, maybe find a drier feta or one that's already crumbled a little bit. But, you know, it is what it is, and this is going to taste really delicious, so I'm not going to complain too much. Alrighty. Then finally, I didn't tell you before, I'm just going to butter the tops of these. So as I've been going, I've been buttering the top of the finished product. Now my oven is on 400 degrees, and these are going to take about 10 to 15 minutes, probably about 12 minutes, but I will check them at 10 minutes. And we're looking for this phyllo to get nice and golden brown and crispy looking. And you know, shrimp doesn't take very long to cook. So at 400 degrees, that should be plenty of time. So I'm gonna get these in the oven, and I will see you back in about 12 minutes. Okay, so we're about 15 minutes later. I did flip these about 2/3 of the way through cooking, just so that we could get a little bit of browning on both sides. I did make a mistake here, and that is with the feta. The feta that I used was brined, and it was a little too wet. And so what happened was it just made these slightly more soggy than I would want. You know, it's pretty crispy most of the way, but there's definitely some areas where it looks like there was a little bit of a blowout, and I really think that has to do with the wet feta. That's weird, wet feta. But what I would do is just make sure you get a dry feta, something that's not soaked in brine. Even some of that pre-crumbled stuff would be great because that tends to be a little bit drier. But otherwise, these smell absolutely delicious. I know they're gonna taste great. So just learn from my mistakes and my learnings throughout this video and give these a try. Don't be too scared to try to work with phyllo. It's a little temperamental, but just with those few tricks of keeping it under wrap and not letting it get dried out and using a lot of butter along the way, you'll be fine. So if you like this recipe, please give it a thumbs up and click that subscribe button and that little bell button to be alerted when I launch a new video. And as always, thanks so much for watching. Now go have some fun in the kitchen.